Sunday was a performance. Sunday began before the sun did. I always knew it was coming by the sound of the steam iron in the kitchen. It made the same steady thump and hiss every week, like the house itself was waking up under orders. Even before I opened my eyes, I could feel the difference in the air. Sundays were quieter than other mornings, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that made you check yourself before you had even done anything wrong. It carried expectation, it carried warning, it carried the feeling that the day was already watching you. My mother was usually the first one fully moving through the house. She ironed with focus, pressing collars and sleeves so flat, they looked less like clothing and more like discipline. The smell of starch mixed with coffee and aftershave, and to this day I associate that combination with behavior. Near the front door, our shoes were lined up in a polished row, gleaming hard enough to reflect light. Everything about Sunday morning suggested inspection. Every detail had to be right before we ever pulled out of the driveway. As a child, I understood, long before I could explain it, that Sunday was not only about worship. That was the official language, of course. We were going to praise God. We were going to the Lord's house. We were getting ready for church. But underneath all of that was something else. Sunday was also about presentation. It was about being seen and judged in ways nobody said out loud. God may have been the reason we went, but the congregation often felt like the audience we were truly preparing for. I remember the process of getting dressed more clearly than I remember most sermons. I remember standing still while my shirt was tucked in tighter than was comfortable. I remember hands smoothing fabric over my stomach so there would not be a wrinkle out of place. I remember cuffs being tugged into alignment and collars being adjusted until I felt less like a child and more like something assembled. My father's reminders came steadily and without emotion. Stand straight, do not slouch, keep your hands out of your pockets, do not fidget, walk right, sit right, act like a young man. That phrase stayed with me. Act like a young man. It seemed simple enough on the surface, but even then I felt that it meant far more than posture. It meant perform something. It meant carry your body in a way that reassures other people. It meant control the parts of yourself that might read as soft, uncertain, or too expressive. Masculinity did not come to me as something natural or internal. It came as instruction, it came as correction, it came as a list of small adjustments repeated so often they began to feel like truth. None of it seemed openly cruel. That was part of what made it so confusing. Nobody raised a hand to me. Nobody shouted that I was failing. The shaping happened more gently than that. It was a steady sanding down, a quiet effort to smooth away anything that stood out too much. I often felt like a piece of wood being planed to fit into a very specific frame. Straight enough, still enough, hard enough. Church, I would later realize, was one of the first places where I learned how to perform myself before I had ever been allowed to fully know who I was. The building itself added to that feeling. From the outside, the church looked plain and familiar, made of brick and routine like 100 others. But the inside carried a different kind of weight. The red carpet hushed your footsteps the moment you entered, and the polished pews caught the light in a way that made the whole sanctuary feel arranged for scrutiny, even when nobody was looking directly at you. The room gave you the sense that you could be seen from every angle. The pulpit stood high and central, commanding attention. The choir robes in the vestry looked like costumes waiting backstage. Everything seemed carefully placed. Everything had presence. As a child, I noticed how much of church functioned like a performance, even if no one would have called it that. There were cues everyone understood without needing to be taught. We knew when to stand, when to sit, when to clap, when to get louder, when to quiet down, when to bow our heads, and when to let emotion become visible. We knew who held which roles. The deacons moved with the seriousness of men used to carrying authority. The mothers of the church wore their hats and gloves with a quiet grandeur that made them seem almost royal. The pastor could shift from a whisper to a roar so smoothly it felt like he was conducting the room more than speaking to it. The organist knew exactly when to stretch a chord until it trembled under everybody's skin. The entire service had a rhythm to it, and most people knew how to move within it. But even then, I could tell not everyone was given the same freedom inside that rhythm. The women seemed allowed a wider emotional range. They could sway, cry, lift their hands, sing with visible feeling, and let their faces reflect whatever the music had touched in them. The men had their own forms of expression, but theirs were narrower. Their praise had to remain contained, grounded, and unmistakably masculine. A nod, a sharp clap, a deep amen from somewhere in the chest. Tears were acceptable only if they looked like struggle, like a hard-earned crack in composure brought on by something greater than the self. A man could be moved, but he still had to look strong while it happened. The boys learned that quickly. We learned that stillness was part of our training. We learned that softness in the wrong places could draw attention. We learned that some forms of joy were acceptable and others required correction. I remember one Sunday in particular when the music reached me before I could stop it. The choir was singing about deliverance, and the organ was so full it seemed to vibrate the floor under my shoes. The sound moved through me in a way that felt both physical and impossible to explain. It rose in my chest like heat. My body responded before I had time to edit it. My shoulders loosened, my hips shifted, my hands lifted slightly, not in some exaggerated way, but simply because the music had gotten inside me and I did not yet know how to refuse it. Then I looked up and caught an Usher watching me. It was only a glance, and yet it said everything. There was no scene, no loud rebuke, just a tightening around the mouth and a certain look in the eyes, the kind that asks a question without words. Why are you moving like that? I lowered my hands immediately. I stilled my body and sat through the rest of the song as if nothing had happened, but something had happened. That was one of the first moments I understood that even joy could have rules. Even praise had a script. Even being moved by the Spirit had to happen in a way that would not make people uncomfortable. I did not have that language then, of course. What I felt in that moment was simpler and sharper. I felt embarrassed. I felt exposed. I felt wrong for responding honestly. After that, I became more careful. I learned to monitor myself in the pew. I paid attention to how I sat, how I sang, how quickly I reacted to the music, what my hands were doing, what my face looked like. The fellowship hall after service had its own kind of performance. The sanctuary held one kind of pressure, and the fellowship hall held another. The air there smelled like fried chicken, floor wax, perfume, and steam from the kitchen. People were looser there, but not free. They had simply moved from one stage to another. The women gathered together in the kitchen or around the serving tables, laughing, plating food, moving with ease and competence. The men often took up space near the walls or by the doors, talking about work, sports, weather, practical things. Boys were expected to drift toward the men. It was assumed that something important would rub off if we stood close enough to their conversations. I remember helping decorate for a banquet one afternoon in the fellowship hall. I had been arranging centerpieces and smoothing tablecloths, making sure everything looked balanced and neat. I liked it. I liked the symmetry of it. I liked the quiet satisfaction of making a room feel intentional. There was a kind of peace in that work, in noticing beauty and wanting things to be placed well. An older man passed by, laughed softly, and patted me on the shoulder. "You got a real knack for that," he said. "A regular decorator." He probably thought he was teasing me lightly. Maybe he even meant it kindly. But the comment hit me with the force of exposure. I felt heat rush into my face so fast it was almost dizzying. It was not because he had used a slur or said anything openly cruel. It was because I immediately understood that my pleasure in that task had been noticed and categorized. I set the flowers down, handed them off to a girl nearby, and made my way over to where the men were standing. When I asked about the game, I dropped my voice lower than normal without even thinking about it. That is one of the hardest things to explain to people who only recognize pain when it comes in obvious forms. The body remembers small humiliations with astonishing clarity. It remembers the tiny moments when delight turns to self-consciousness. It remembers when a harmless pleasure suddenly starts to feel dangerous. It remembers when you first understand that being yourself too visibly may cost you something. Church never physically harmed me. Nobody dragged me to the altar to cast anything out of me. Nobody pointed me out from the pulpit and named me as a warning. But silence can shape a child just as powerfully as violence can, especially when that silence is full of implication. In church, we talked often about sin, temptation, rebellion, the flesh, and the narrow path. But there were other things we did not say directly. We did not have to. The meaning found its way into the room anyway. The boys who moved too freely, sang too sweetly, or seemed too expressive were not always condemned outright. Sometimes they were spoken about in lowered voices. They were prayed for. They were said to need guidance, structure, stronger examples, more discipline. The word itself, the one hanging unspoken over so much of it, rarely had to be used. The warning was already built into the atmosphere. The message was clear enough without being named. As I got older, that silence became one of the most powerful forces in my inner life. I started trying to interpret myself through the language I heard in sermons. Was what I felt rebellion? Was it temptation? Was it weakness? Was it flesh? Was I broken in some way I could not yet articulate? The terrible thing was that I did not feel evil. I felt alive. I felt curious. I felt drawn toward things I did not know how to explain. I felt tenderness and hunger and sensitivity and a kind of emotional openness that did not fit the version of boyhood being praised around me. Every time I heard words like unnatural desire or warnings about straying from God's design, something heavy dropped inside me. It was never just a spiritual concept. It landed in my body. It changed how I sat with myself. It changed how I imagined God. I stopped picturing a loving witness and began picturing a divine evaluator, someone watching closely for errors in my posture, my voice, my instincts, my wanting. God in my mind started to look more and more like the congregation, not warm, not tender, observant, measuring, waiting for me to get something wrong. Looking back now, I understand how much fear lived inside that version of faith. Not just my fear, but everybody's. Fear about appearances, fear about failure, fear about what happens when a child does not fit cleanly into the script handed to him. I understand too that many of the people around me thought they were protecting me. They were trying to prepare me for a hard world by teaching me how to appear acceptable inside it. In some ways, that instinct came from love, but love that demands self-erasure leaves a very particular wound. It teaches you that belonging is conditional, that your safety depends on your performance, and that parts of you must remain hidden if you want to stay inside the room. For a long time, I carried that lesson everywhere. I carried it into the way I spoke, the way I laughed, the way I stood, and the way I let myself be seen. I learned to check my wrists before I gestured. I learned to hear my own voice through other people's judgment. I learned to interrupt myself before anybody else had the chance. That kind of self-editing becomes so practiced that it can start to feel like personality. It can start to feel like maturity. But underneath it is often just fear wearing good manners. The healing from that kind of upbringing did not happen all at once. It was not dramatic. there was no single day when all the old shame left my body. It has been slower than that, more layered. Healing has looked like noticing old habits and asking where they came from. It has looked like catching myself adjusting my voice in certain rooms and choosing not to. It has looked like realizing how often I had confused hardness with safety. It has looked like grieving the years I spent treating my own softness like evidence against me. Most of all, healing has changed the way I remember that child I used to be. For years, I looked back on him with a kind of secondhand embarrassment. I saw how careful he was, how eager to get it right, how visibly unlike the image of boyhood he was being given. And I felt sorry for him in a way that still carried shame. But now when I think of that boy sitting in the pew, trying to sit still while the music begged him to move, something else rises in me. I feel protective. I see a child who was trying very hard to survive a room full of expectations he could not yet name. I see a child who was not rebellious or broken or sinful, but observant, sensitive, deeply alive. I see a child whose spirit responded honestly to beauty and emotion, and who learned too early that honesty could be costly. He did not need to be sanded down. He did not need to be corrected into stiffness. He needed language. He needed safety. He needed someone to tell him that softness was not the enemy of holiness. That may be the truth I had to fight hardest to learn. Softness is not weakness. Tenderness is not failure. Sensitivity is not something shameful that has to be hidden behind performance. The very parts of me that were treated as suspect were also the parts most capable of deep feeling, empathy, beauty, and truth. What some people saw as flaws were often the clearest signs of life in me. When I think about church now, I try to do so with honesty. It was not all one thing. It held real faith, real community, real comfort, real music, and real longing, but it also held performance. It held strict roles. It held fear disguised as order. And for many of us, especially those of us who were already being watched for signs of difference, it became one of the first places we learned how to disappear inside ourselves. Sunday was a performance. The church was a stage. Masculinity was a costume handed to boys before they were old enough to decide whether it fit. God was invoked as witness to all of it, but the truest thing in that room, the holiest thing in that room, was never the performance. It was the boy beneath the suit. It was the child trying to stay tender in a place that kept rewarding hardness. It was the child trying to remain honest while learning that honesty might make him visible in dangerous ways. It was the child who thought he had to wait for permission to be fully himself. He did not. That is what I know now, and what I wish I could have told him then. He did not need another cue. He did not need another correction. He did not need the approval of the room. He did not need to wait for the right prayer, the right sermon, the right altar call, or the right amen. He was already enough before anyone tried to shape him into something easier to bless. And one day, long after the polished shoes and starched collars and silent corrections of those Sundays, he finally learned that freedom was not waiting for him at the end of somebody else's script. It had been sitting inside him the whole time, quiet but alive, asking only to be trusted. Sunday